Do you really think today's bodybuilders are better than the old school legends? Does more mass really mean better quality? In this video, we're going to show you why the giants of the past still put most of today's pros to shame. Get ready to see physiques, stage presence, and attitude you just don't see anymore. This is going to challenge everything you thought you knew about the sport. So you know the drill, grab your pre-workout, and come along for the ride, because this trip through time is going to leave you shocked. If you're a fan of true hardcore bodybuilding, this one's for you. Bob Paris might not be the first name that comes to mind when we talk about massive size, but he's definitely one of the most respected when it comes to pure aesthetics. His physique looked like it had been hand-sculpted, so perfectly proportioned it resembled a Greek statue more than a modern bodybuilding competitor. He didn't need to go overboard with mass to impress. His secret was in the elegance of his lines, flawless symmetry, and that mesmerizing stage presence. It was like each pose was part of a carefully crafted artistic performance. And let's be honest, that kind of artistry is pretty rare on today's stages. Have modern bodybuilders forgotten the art behind the sport? While most of today's athletes are all in on sheer size and density, often at the expense of overall harmony, Bob went in the opposite direction. He believed that the true champion wasn't the biggest, but the best built. With a tiny waist, wide shoulders, and razor-sharp definition, he was the blueprint for what bodybuilding could aspire to be. These days, it's common to see blocky, bloated physiques with no flow. Do you feel like the beauty is missing in today's physiques too? Bob Paris showed us that less can be more if it's done right. Another thing that set Bob apart from today's athletes was his ability to connect with the audience. His posing wasn't just technical, it was emotional. He radiated confidence, calm, and even a sense of vulnerability with every move that made his performances unforgettable. When's the last time you saw a modern bodybuilder with that kind of stage charisma? Most seem more focused on maxing out their size, even if it kills the aesthetics. Bob didn't just show off muscle. He told a story with every pose. And that's something we're really missing today. It's also worth noting that Bob competed in a time without the advanced hormonal protocols, extreme diets, or dehydration tricks we see now. Even so, he managed to bring a clean, dry, and insanely symmetrical physique to the stage. That just shows how on another level his body control and dedication were. Today, with all the science and tools available, many can't even come close to the refinement Bob delivered. Isn't that kind of ironic? How is it that with more resources, the end result is often less impressive? Comparing Bob Paris to today's athletes highlights a big shift in what bodybuilding values. Back then, it was all about athletic beauty and balance. Now it seems the freakier the body, the better. But does that really win over the crowd? Has the sport lost part of its soul by chasing size alone? A lot of old school fans would say yes. Maybe that's why videos of Bob still go viral today, decades after he left the stage. And Bob wasn't just muscle, he had a voice. He was one of the first bodybuilders to speak out on controversial issues, standing up for equality, authenticity, and representation. He wasn't afraid to be himself, both on and off stage. That kind of courage added to his appeal. While many of today's athletes stick to cookie-cutter formulas, Bob created his own narrative. That made him respected not just as a bodybuilder, but as a person. In the end, Bob Paris didn't need to be the biggest to be a giant. He left a lasting legacy in the sport, proving that aesthetics can and should go hand in hand with performance. Shawn Ray is one of those names that always sparks debate, but one thing's for sure. Consistency was his trademark. In an era full of giants and constant shifts, he stayed at the top for over a decade, always bringing a sharp, symmetrical, and flawless physique to the stage. Show after show, Shawn delivered the same high standard of excellence. He was never out of shape, never off his game. And in a sport where the tiniest slip can ruin your chances, that says a lot. Can you think of any athlete today with that same level of consistency? What stood out most about Shawn Ray was his balance. He had enough muscle mass to hang with the big guys, but he never sacrificed aesthetics to get there. His waist was tight, his muscles were dense and proportional, and his skin looked paper thin. That kind of look made fans go wild and often split the judges. In today's world, where bloated midsections have become common on stage, Shawn's physique still stands out as a gold standard. Even with all that excellence, Shawn Ray rarely took home the big prize. He placed in the top 5 at Mr. Olympia for 12 straight years and still never won. That raises a classic question: were the judging criteria back then really fair? And if he competed today with that same physique, would he still be overlooked? Many fans believe he was one of the most robbed athletes in bodybuilding history. What do you think? Should Shawn have taken home at least one Sando? Another thing that sets Shawn apart from today's athletes is his longevity. These days, it's common to see guys blow up and burn out within a few years, whether from injuries, harsh cycles, or just mental and physical exhaustion. Not Shawn. He kept his body healthy and competitive at the highest level for over a decade. That shows intelligence, discipline, and deep understanding of his own limits. And that, too, is what defines a real athlete. What's the point of exploding onto the scene if you vanish just as fast? His stage presence was something else. He knew how to pose, had confidence, and could truly connect with the audience through his performance. It wasn't just a display of muscle. It was a full-on show. Too many athletes today move like machines with stiff, soulless posing routines. Shawn made the crowd feel what he wanted them to feel. That kind of connection doesn't come just from practice. It comes from sensitivity and mastery of your craft. Don't you miss that emotional spark on stage? On top of his physical skills, Shawn Ray was sharp in interviews and never shy about sharing his opinions. He spoke up about the direction of the sport, criticized decisions, and stood firmly for classic aesthetics. That rubbed some people the wrong way, but it also earned him respect and made him unforgettable. In today's landscape, where most prefer to play it safe and avoid controversy, his boldness stands out even more. Shawn Ray may never have won the Olympia, but he conquered something far greater: time. His physique is still used as a reference, his name still stirs conversation, and his presence lives on in the hearts of fans. When you compare that to many modern champs who are forgotten just a couple years later, it's clear Shawn's legacy is stronger than most titles. If you think massive bodybuilders can't be good-looking, that's probably because you've never seen Marcus Rule on stage. He was a straight-up genetic freak, in the best way possible. His shoulders looked like cannonballs, his arms defied logic, and yet somehow, he kept his silhouette balanced. That's incredibly rare. Most guys chasing extreme size end up throwing aesthetics out the window. But Marcus proved you could be a monster with style. Tell me, have you seen anyone today with that level of size and symmetry? Most of today's athletes who try to match Rule's size end up wrecking their physiques. Waists get thicker, proportions go out the window, and the overall look just loses harmony. But Marcus, despite being insanely huge, kept impressive control over his waistline. That's what separates a true phenomenon from an overdone bodybuilding project. Nowadays, you see a lot of bulky, dense physiques that just look uncomfortable. There's mass, but not the magic. Another crazy thing about Marcus was that he didn't just look good standing still. His posing was brutal. He knew exactly how to highlight every strength. Every transition felt explosive, but never sloppy. The side symmetry, those massive arms, that full chest, it all worked together. It was shocking, yet mesmerizing. Sure, there are guys today with similar size, but how many of them can move with that same grace and visual coherence? That's what we're missing these days. Despite his monstrous build, Marcus had loads of charisma. Off stage, he was funny, approachable, and always had something real to say to fans. That helped him build a loyal following that's still going strong today. Even after retirement, he packs out expos and inspires lifters around the world. A lot of modern bodybuilders have impressive physiques, but struggle to connect with fans. Is that what's missing in today's bodybuilding? Has this generation gotten so obsessed with muscle that they forgot about audience connection? Marcus also represents a turning point, from the aesthetic era to the hardcore mass era. But unlike others who just ballooned up, he held onto the essence of the classic physique. It was like injecting steroids into a Greek statue without breaking the mold. And that's a rare balance to achieve. He didn't just get bigger. He got bigger without losing form. Even without a Mr. Olympia win, Marcus Rule made history. His image still stands as a symbol of what truly massive means. And the best part? He never had to fake a persona. He was raw, honest, and deeply committed. In a time when physiques can feel mass-produced, Rule still stands out as something one of a kind. And that's not something you build in the gym. It comes from identity. In the end, Marcus Rule proved you can be a monster and still keep style, proportion, and visual impact. A lot of today's giants look puffy, soulless, and forgettable. Marcus, even in his excess, was still art, muscle-turned masterpiece. When Nasser Elsidi stepped on stage, the whole atmosphere changed. You couldn't ignore his presence. He wasn't just big, he was massive, solid, and downright intimidating. But what really blew people away was that despite his sheer size, his muscle definition and anatomical detail were next level. The muscle striations, the separation between muscle groups, everything screamed precision and excellence. It wasn't just a bunch of mass slapped on a frame, it was sculpted depth. So tell me, how many athletes today can really deliver that full package? Nasser looked like a walking wall of muscle. His chest was like armor, his thick arms stood out even among the biggest guys of his era, and his legs were like chiseled blocks. He was the perfect fusion of size, density, and aesthetics. These days, sure, we see some massive athletes, but they usually have obvious weak points. One has small arms, another lacks back thickness, another has thick skin and no definition. With Nasser, there were no holes, just pure, consistent domination. One of Nasser's biggest weapons was his stage presence. He didn't just show up, he took over. The look on his face, the way he stared down the judges, the confidence in his stance, it all said, "I'm the best one here." Even when he didn't win, his impact was so strong he often stole the show. These days, a lot of athletes come off as timid, low energy, almost robotic on stage. Do you agree that charisma still counts in bodybuilding? What also set Nasser apart was how he carried himself off stage. He was highly intelligent, spoke multiple languages, and wasn't afraid to share strong opinions. He earned respect not just as a bodybuilder, but as a public figure. That only boosted the admiration fans had for him. In an era where many athletes stick to cookie-cutter content and flex for the gram, Nasser felt like he came from another planet. He thought, spoke, and acted like a true ambassador of the sport. Don't you think that kind of presence is missing today? And then there's his legendary rivalry with Dorian Yates, especially the controversial 1997 Olympia, which is still one of the most debated moments in bodybuilding history. A lot of people think Nasser should have taken the title that year, and honestly, his physique was insane. At that point, he represented a new standard in the sport. Size, detail, proportion, and presence all rolled into one. If he were competing today, wouldn't he be walking away with wins left and right? Who could really stand toe-to-toe with that? Even with all his qualities, Nasser didn't always get the recognition he deserved, and that made him even more iconic. He became the symbol of refined brute force, the kind of wall you couldn't ignore but that still had class. A lot of today's athletes have the build, but lack the soul. They've got muscle but no identity, and that's where Nasser humbles them. He was the full package, inside and out. At the end of the day, Nasser Elsidi was more than just a colossal physique. He was a symbol of power with elegance, impact with precision, presence with intelligence. And when you look at today's bodybuilding stage, it's hard to find someone who truly fills that space. Plenty try, but few come close. Cutler wasn't just a champion. He was the architect of his own greatness. While plenty of athletes lean on genetics or luck, Jay built his legacy through discipline, study, and constant reinvention. His physique was dense, solid, and controlled. No bloating, no distortion. He didn't burst onto the scene as a favorite, but he became unbeatable because he knew how to evolve in every detail. Taking down Ronnie Coleman seemed impossible until Jay proved otherwise. Do you think any current athlete has that same kind of strategic mindset? Jay's waist control was legendary, especially for a guy weighing over 265 pounds, 120 kilograms. on stage. He kept his abs tight, his vacuum clean, and his silhouette balanced. That's something you rarely see today. Most modern athletes push their size. So far, they lose core control and end up with physiques that look distended and uncomfortable. Jay showed the world that you can be huge without looking like a science experiment gone wrong. He was also a master of presentation. Every pose was calculated to highlight strengths and hide flaws. He studied his opponents, tweaked his physique year after year, and always came in with something new. That's what we call competitive intelligence, and it's pretty rare these days. So many athletes today just rinse and repeat the same formulas, hoping for different results. Don't you think bodybuilding needs more brains and less brute force right now? Another thing that sets Jay apart is his longevity. He stayed at the top for years, going head-to-head with different generations and adapting every step of the way. He placed second 4 times before finally winning his first Sando. That takes serious grit. How many athletes today have that kind of patience and resilience? Most tap out after a single setback. Jay proved that persistence is a weapon in itself. And beyond the stage, Jay was a class act. He treated fans with respect, built smart businesses, created educational content, and promoted the sport in a thoughtful way. Even now, his online presence is massive, and his voice still carries weight across the fitness world. Can you name many current athletes with that full package approach? Physique, mindset, charisma, and long-term influence? Jay had it all, and that's a rare thing, especially in today's landscape. Even after retirement, Jay Cutler's physique is still used as a benchmark. So many bodybuilders pull up his photos for inspiration on how to balance size and proportion. That's real legacy. In an era where many Mr. Olympias are forgotten within a few years, Jay's name still shines. Have you noticed how quickly some recent champions fade into obscurity? In that blackout, Jay's light keeps burning, and that speaks volumes about who he was as an athlete. At the end of the day, Jay Cutler wasn't just the guy who dethroned Ronnie Coleman. He was the guy who proved that with strategy, patience, and discipline, even the most intimidating giants can fall. In this age of shortcuts, overkill, and copy-paste routines, Jay represents the power of intelligence in bodybuilding. And honestly, that puts a lot of today's athletes to shame. So what do you think? Would Jay be a threat if he stepped on stage today? Drop your thoughts and let's talk. Flex Wheeler didn't even look real. His physique was so flawless. It was like someone had applied a digital filter. Wide shoulders, ridiculously tiny waist, round, full muscles, paper-thin skin. He was simply unreal. If bodybuilding had a perfect beauty standard, Flex would be the blueprint. And most mind-blowing part, he made it all look easy. How many athletes today have that level of harmony? Truth is, even with all the tech and science available now, no one's been able to replicate Flex. He may not have won a Mr. Olympia title, but his aesthetics are legendary. Even Olympia champs still pay him homage. Flex was the kind of athlete who shaped the public's imagination, the kind that makes you say, that's what I want to look like. Today, with physiques becoming more extreme, bloated stomachs, and awkward proportions, Flex's legacy feels more valuable than ever. Makes you wonder, are we heading in the wrong direction? Flex's body was the perfect balance between mass and flow. He was big, but never overdone. Every muscle had the right shape, the right depth, in the right place. It wasn't just mass, it was pure body architecture. Watching him was like seeing a sculpture come to life. Today, you see stiff physiques, muscles that look pumped up but lack definition. Ever notice how a lot of modern athletes look more inflated than sculpted? He was also a posing master. He didn't just hit mandatory poses. He expressed himself through movement. Every transition, every shot was designed to stir the audience. He blended strength with artistry, something we rarely see today. These days, most athletes just seem focused on showing size. But what about the rest? Where's the elegance, the rhythm, the visual impact that truly stuns? Even while battling kidney issues for most of his career, Flex competed at the highest level and delivered jaw-dropping physiques. That proves it wasn't just genetics. There was serious discipline and commitment behind that body. He made it look easy, but it was nothing short of dedication. Compared to some of today's athletes who vanish after the first setback, Flex stands out as even more admirable. His legacy goes way beyond the stage. To this day, Flex is the gold standard for aesthetics and an inspiration for athletes worldwide. He's remembered not just for what he built, but for what he represented, the peak of muscular beauty. And even without a Mr. Olympia title, his name is spoken with reverence. Just think how many trophy winners today are already forgotten. That shows how true aesthetics leave a deeper mark than any medal. Flex Wheeler proved that bodybuilding can be art. He turned the stage into a living gallery. And when you compare that to today's blocky, bloated, distended physiques, it's obvious. Most athletes today don't even come close to the masterpiece that was Flex. Kevin Levrone looked like he came from another planet. While most bodybuilders needed months of hardcore prep, Kevin was known for kicking off serious training just a few months before a show. And the result? One of the most jaw-dropping physiques in the world. Dense, defined, symmetrical muscles and a razor-thin waist. It was like his body had a transformation switch. Can you imagine any current athlete making that kind of rapid comeback? Even without a traditional off-season, Kevin would step on stage looking like a world champ. That alone shows how freakish his genetics were. He didn't just grow fast, he kept his aesthetics on point, which is almost unheard of. Nowadays, with all the tools, tech, and year-round training, plenty of athletes still can't match the look Levrone pulled off with half the effort. Makes you wonder, does the new generation rely more on chemistry than real talent? One of his biggest strengths was his symmetry. Kevin managed to pack on serious size without ever losing his lines. Shoulders, arms, chest, legs, everything flowed perfectly, and that tiny waist made him look even bigger and more impressive. A lot of athletes today bulk up and lose all proportion. Kevin bulked and somehow got even prettier. That's rare. On top of that, Kevin had killer stage presence. His poses were strong, clean, and radiated pure confidence. He knew exactly what he was working with and used it to perfection. It wasn't just muscle, it was performance. And the audience felt it. In a time when most posing routines feel soulless and repetitive, Kevin's charisma on stage felt like a show all by itself. Even with all that god-tier genetics, Kevin trained like a beast. He didn't use his natural gifts as an excuse to slack off. He pushed hard, with focus and intensity, that made him even more dangerous to his rivals. And that competitive fire, mixed with insane talent, puts a lot of today's athletes to shame, especially the ones who obsess over complex protocols but miss the basics. Kevin was also known for being humble and classy offstage, always respectful with fans, fellow athletes, and the sport's legacy. Even after retirement, he made a comeback, not to prove anything to anyone, but simply because he still loved to compete. That kind of passion is rare these days. How many modern athletes would step back on stage purely for love of the game, not for likes or ego? At the end of the day, Kevin Levrone was the full package. Insane genetics, flawless symmetry, raw strength, stage presence, and iron discipline. He's living proof that natural talent, when pushed to the limit, becomes legend. And when you look at the current scene, with bloated physiques, broken lines, and no real identity, it's obvious. Kevin still puts most of this new generation to shame. Dorian Yates wasn't just another Mr. Olympia. He was a game changer. Before him, the standard was still rooted in classic aesthetics. After him, the era of the mass monsters began. But Dorian wasn't just about size. He brought insane muscle density, deep cuts, and a dry, granite-hard look that seemed sculpted with a scalpel. His muscles looked like they weighed twice as much as anyone else's. And even then, he kept a tight waist and solid proportions. Can we really say the same about many of today's top athletes? Even though he opened the doors for bigger physiques, Dorian still maintained a technical standard that feels lost now. His waist was under control, abs always locked in, and his posture was on point. He understood that being big wasn't enough. You had to be put together. These days, we see plenty of mass, but also bloated guts, sloppy posing, and stage presence that borders on uncomfortable. Dorian also stood out for his insane focus during training. He popularized the infamous blood and guts style, where every set pushed past the breaking point. Every rep was done with rage, precision, and total intent. That level of intensity helped carve out one of the scariest physiques in history. How many athletes today train like that? It feels like the modern focus is more on drug protocols than actual intensity in the gym. Have you noticed that too? What made Dorian even more unique was how meticulous he was. He studied his own body, fine-tuned his diet down to the gram, and did it all away from the spotlight. No showboating, no distractions. His reserved personality was the complete opposite of the raw power he brought to the stage. In today's social media-driven world, where image often trumps substance, Dorian's approach would feel like a punch of reality. Even during his 6-year Olympia reign, Dorian showed respect to his rivals and to his fans. He was cold, calculated, and laser-focused, but never arrogant. And that made him a complete champion. Too many athletes today confuse confidence with cockiness and end up losing their charm. Ever felt that while watching a modern competition? Dorian knew the weight of the legacy he was building, and you could see it in every pose, every moment, every word. His impact still echoes today. Many bodybuilders continue to follow his training principles, rewatch his videos, and mimic his philosophy. But few can match the outcome, because it wasn't just about the training or the food. It was a mindset. It was about being willing to suffer, to sacrifice, to earn greatness. He proved that monster size could still come with symmetry, consistency, and class. Dorian Yates ushered in a new era, but with values many of his descendants seem to have forgotten. Yes, he opened the door to mass, but he never let go of quality. And when you line up his physique next to many of today's champions, the difference couldn't be more obvious. Arnold Schwarzenegger isn't just the most famous bodybuilder in the world. He's the ultimate symbol of the sport. His image goes far beyond the stage. With near-mythical proportions, a proud chest, chiseled waist, and iconic arms, he became the gold standard for generations. What Arnold achieved with the limited resources of his time is still out of reach for many, even with all the modern advances. And the wildest part? He did it all without looking over the top. How many athletes today can say the same? Arnold's presence on stage was hypnotic. He didn't just pose. He owned the stage with charisma, posture, and expression. One look and it felt like he was saying, "That trophy's already mine." That kind of confidence moved the crowd and even influenced the judges. He turned bodybuilding into a performance. How many competitors today have that same magnetism? Plenty show up with big physiques, but no soul, no presence. Don't you feel like charisma is missing in today's bodybuilding? Arnold was also a genius when it came to building his personal brand. Offstage, he became a movie star, a businessman, and even the governor of California. And it all started with the foundation he built in bodybuilding. He saw the sport as a launch pad, and that kind of vision is rare today. Too many modern athletes stay stuck in the gym bubble, never realizing their full potential outside it. Even with the limited tools of his time, Arnold presented a full, dry, and balanced physique. He relied on knowledge, intense training, and discipline to push his body to the max. No extreme drug stacks, no crazy diuretics, no over-the-top protocols. And yet, the result was legendary. Today, with physiques so heavily dependent on chemistry, you can't help but wonder, where did the actual merit go? Arnold's physique is still the blueprint. Artists, sculptors, supplement brands, and filmmakers continue to use his image as the ideal. And for good reason. He represents everything great about bodybuilding: shape, size, proportion, presence, and most of all, identity. A lot of today's athletes have muscle, but no brand. Arnold didn't need to keep competing to be remembered. He became timeless. Another thing, Arnold knew how to sell himself. He was bold, he spoke to the crowd, gave unforgettable interviews, and wasn't afraid to be authentic. That ability to stand out offstage helped elevate the sport to new heights. Today, too many athletes hide behind cookie-cutter social media content with no real personality. Arnold Schwarzenegger wasn't just the best of his era. He became the benchmark by which all others are judged. And even with all the technical and scientific advancements since his time, very few have come close to the impact he made. If there's one name in bodybuilding that needs no introduction, it's Ronnie Coleman. He wasn't just big, he was unreal. Ronnie pushed muscle mass to the absolute limit without sacrificing symmetry, definition, or proportion. His physique in the early 2000s looked like a fusion of superhero and war machine. And even today, no one has been able to bring that same complete package to the stage. With all the modern advancements, you have to wonder, why hasn't anyone matched him yet? Ronnie was the perfect storm of brutality and beauty. His lats were like closet doors, his arms were slabs of concrete, and his legs? Literal Greek columns wrapped in veins. And despite this monstrous size, he kept his abs tight, his muscle separation crisp, and a visual impact that made every other competitor fade into the background. Have you ever seen someone step on stage and make other giants look small? Ronnie did it routinely. Part of that freaky look came from his insane strength. Ronnie lifted weights that seemed impossible, and he smiled doing it. That kind of intensity showed that what he brought to the stage wasn't just genetics or chemistry. It was pure, back-breaking work. Nowadays, many athletes train lighter, focus only on aesthetics, and lean more on pharmacology than effort. Is that really the right path? Even with all that mass, Ronnie never looked distended or out of control. He maintained precise core control, and his posing was sharp, powerful, and commanding. He didn't just dominate with size. He knew exactly how to show it off. That's a skill that's sorely lacking today. And beyond the physical, Ronnie competed with heart. You could see the love he had for the sport in everything he did. His iconic, "Yeah, buddy," and "lightweight, baby" aren't just catchphrases, they're battle cries for lifters around the world. Even after countless surgeries and living with daily pain, he still smiles and stands proud of his journey. Can today's athletes match that level of resilience? Could they handle the cost of greatness like Ronnie did? Despite all the modern tools, labs, coaches, hyper-personalized diets, advanced biochemical protocols, no one's been able to replicate Ronnie Coleman's physique. That tells you something. Some things just can't be copied. Because what Ronnie had went way beyond the physical. It was soul. It was purpose. It was a mission. Do you believe the greatest bodybuilder of all time is still someone who peaked over 20 years ago? At the end of the day, Ronnie Coleman is the pinnacle of the human body in sport. He took bodybuilding to its outer limits with style, grit, and unstoppable discipline. Even with everything the industry has developed since, he remains the summit no one's reached. And if anyone still thinks today's athletes are better, just pull up a photo of Ronnie in his prime. So, what do you think? Does Ronnie still humble the new generation? So, after going through these true titans of the past, do you still think today's bodybuilders are better? Each of these legends left a legacy that won't fade, and they prove that bodybuilding is way more than just size. It's about aesthetics, discipline, presence, history, and soul. If you love this kind of content that celebrates the best of what the sport has to offer, go ahead and drop a like down below. It really helps the channel grow. And tell me in the comments, which one of these giants impressed you the most? Or is there someone you think we should have included on the list? I'd love to hear your take. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that button, turn on notifications, and join our community that lives and breathes real bodybuilding. Around here, we keep it honest, respectful, and passionate. And hey, if you want to support the channel even more, consider becoming a member. Thanks a ton for watching all the way through. I'll catch you in the next video. And remember, size matters, but it's legacy that makes a champion truly eternal.